The movie Heretic was one of those horror films that literally had me doing some deep research, wanting to watch it twice, and going all down the rabbit hole. So let's talk about what they did and didn't do well. Now, the way I do my videos is I'm going to talk about non-spoiler kind of generic terms in the very beginning of it, and then I will make it very, very obvious when we go into the spoiler alert feature of this, and you'll know you're entering into spoiler alert territory. So for the non-spoiler alert part of this, let's talk about Heretic, another A24 production, and it brings us Hugh Grant in a very different light. In fact, in dim lights, in a basement, and Bibles, and all sorts of stuff, right? So this was directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. These are the guys who co-wrote A Quiet Place. Now, Heretic will basically trap us in this house, okay, with these two Mormon missionaries and a man who has some serious issues, okay, very unhinged. So in the movie, we see these two young women there on their Mormon mission, and they end up, going to this person's house to, he signed up to have them come speak to them and whatnot. And things go downhill, and I would say fast, but it's kind of a slow burn, right? But things do go downhill. Now, Hugh Grant plays Mr. Reed. This is the charming but unsettling guy who lures them inside. Now, once they get inside, this is when the slow burn starts to happen, that he might be up to something a little bit darker, a little bit more sinister, okay? This movie relies less on, Friday the 13th type things, at least in the beginning it does, and it relies more on like it's a mental movie, okay? Psychological thriller, not even a thriller, but just it gets really into your mind, and it's very heavily religious based. Now, one thing that this film does well is it's played out in essentially one location, but different rooms within the location, and that is the house. So it gives it a very claustrophobic, I want to escape but can't type vibe. So let's talk about some of the things that I found really strong about the film. Number one, Hugh Grant, okay? Like major well role played here, okay? I'm very used to growing up and seeing him in rom-com type things, and this was like a completely new side to him, and he did it very well. He was very unsettling. I also found that the two ladies playing the Mormon women were amazing as well, and they really played off of each other very well. Now, the whole atmosphere of this movie that the directors bring into it is very well, right? This creates this amazing tension. So you're talking about a very kind of quiet film, heavily dialogue based, which usually could be kind of like, but it works well in this, okay? And just the overall theme of the movie, or not theme, but like the visuals, if you will. It's very rainy, it's very dark, it's very gloomy. This is like a movie that's like, let me get my blankie on a rainy day and my cocoa and watch this and dissect it. Now, the themes of the movie were very interesting, right? We're talking about faith, control, obedience, all of these kind of things that are wrapped up into this. If you follow me on my true crime channel, we followed a lot of cases that, are in and loosely related in the LDS faith and whatnot. And so this was very interesting, coming and watching a complete, absolute fiction piece done on it, but the things that can go wrong, right? Now, also, like I said, as far as like, audio, sound, stuff like that, there's not really a bunch of like background music and all that type of stuff. So it gives you the feeling like you're actually in the house with them, right? Hearing every little thing that they do. Now, on that level, let's talk about some of the things that I didn't feel it does well. Number one, even though the atmosphere is great, the pacing of this movie is a little bit slow. Okay, like literally this is one where you're like, where are we going here? Like what are we doing, okay? Because the trailer is a trailer that I would almost say the trailer makes it seem like it's one way, but it really isn't most of the film. It's literally a very slow burn. This has more of a dread feeling than a jump scare feeling, okay? So if you are looking for that, Insidious, Friday the 13th, Scream, that type of stuff, this ain't the movie for you, okay, at all. Now, there is also a little bit of, I don't even know if you would say undeveloped backstory, but there's a lot, like say with the two young ladies, that could have been brought out a little bit more to give us a little more of them, right? And it comes out, their backstories come out, but I just felt like for as much dialogue and what was going on, we could have delved a little bit into some of the things that they ring the bell on. Okay, so all that being said, I would give this movie an 7.5 out of 10. So he gets a slice of the spice, but not, the dice too. Okay. Definitely like, by this point it's not in the theaters anymore, obviously, but this is definitely like a rainy day kind of movie, but you have to be paying attention to it because that's the whole point of the film. This is not something you put in the background and scroll and then tune into every now and then because you'll be like, what are we watching? Why are they still sitting in this room talking? You see what I'm saying? So you have to be paying attention to it. So it's one that you're going to want to watch. This is, again, fire in the fireplace, rainy outside, blankie, hot cocoa, nighttime, sitting there, preferably with somebody you can talk to, because that would be, but this is when you're going to want to discuss and whatnot. So that being said, in the count of 3, we're going to enter into the spoiler alert zone. Okay, so if you want to watch this from what I based on it, but you don't want to know all the stuff, this part's not for you. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, we are in the secret section, the secret sofa section. Okay, so we are introduced in this film. We see the 2 Mormon missionaries, right? Sister Paxton, Sister Barnes. We hear these kind of like quirky, like awkward stories that they're talking about that really put you into the same mental mindset of each of them and their belief systems and how they interact with the world, which will be imperative once they go and knock on Mr. Reed's door. Now, at first, Mr. Reed is like, they're like, hey, we can't come in unless there's another lady present. He's like, well, my wife's inside cooking a pie. And they're like, hey, that does well. And it's raining and it's like all bad outside. So they come inside, right? So he's very polite at first. He's all this type of stuff. But they start to get into this like theological discussion, which at first is like, okay, cool. But he's like very low key challenging their belief systems, right? And asking them these questions and whatnot that seem kind of intellectual on one side, but it gets deeper and a little bit more awkward, Now, remember that pie that we were talking about where he's like, my wife's cooking a pie? Well, they start to finally ask because she doesn't show her face, right? And there's like, where is this person? And so by hook or crook, basically the ladies realize the candle burning there is a blueberry pie candle. So they're like, there is no pie. This realization starts to be like, oh my gosh. Well, then they realize they are locked in this house, right? And when I say locked, they are trapped. Like the house feels like a trap. Now, once this takes place, this is when Reed begins the psychological manipulation of them. He's using scripture, games, like all sorts of stuff to break down not only their faith, but their identities completely, okay? And this is when you start to see how each of them differ and how they interact with the world and their experiences and whatnot, okay? Now, it comes out during all this, that then this will play towards the end of it, that Mr. Reed has done this before, okay? That he has this whole history of luring missionaries or religious visitors and making them go through this whole twisted moral test. What it feels like is the movie, if you're familiar with this, Saw, how people find themselves in this game, but not with all the blood and guts. It's almost like the faith version, horror version of this. It's almost like A24 took Saw and said, let's invert this. And instead of making it blood and guts and all this, it's going to be like this psychological horror, right? So that plays into the home itself playing a character, like this claustrophobic character, okay? Like there's no sense of time. You're just completely cut off and locked in and all this, okay? And during these times, like you're seeing the girls, the ladies interact, they question their beliefs. It's almost like this illusion, right? Now, you also see, flashbacks, their personal conversation. All this reveals some of their past, unresolved traumas, doubts about their own religion, all these things, right? Remember, we met them on this kind of superficial, like, I barely even talked about sex level, to where we're now here, okay? Now, we also get a little bit of Reed's background and whatnot, that he might have been a believer and all this type of stuff or whatever, and then something happened and whatnot. Okay, so also the whole game that is proposed is the whole thing of like, hey, there's this game, one of you can go free, right? But you have to essentially denounce your beliefs, condemn the other, all this type of stuff, okay? Now, there's obviously causes tension between the missionaries, and that part's going on as well, okay? Then we have this whole thing at the end, and we're gonna have like almost a couple of different spoiler sections of this, because the ending is so heavy, it's literally specific to each person. But throughout this whole maze, they end up in this part of the house. This woman comes out, she eats a pie. They're supposed to see somebody, you know, resurrect, all this type stuff. And then you end up, this takes place, okay? And you end up seeing this whole thing of this area where these other girls are kept. And it's like, oh my God, this is where he's been doing this before and whatnot, right? And there's this dramatic ending where, you know, she stabs him and this happens and who's gonna live and blah, 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 blah. One of the girls gets out, you know, it has this very ambiguous ending of a butterfly landing on her. So you don't really know, you know, like, okay, what's like, it's blurry, okay? It's just very blurry. And the end that I'm describing, that's the part that you've been building up to with all this conversation and religious rhetoric and psychological stuff going on, to now this like, wait, what's this woman thing coming down and she's eating this and she's saying this isn't real, you know? And then we see the other person, like she had actually taken the place. You're like, was this just another version of like the last victim of his basically doing what he said in order to live, right? It's almost like that is now their thing that they have to do. And so that whole part just comes out of blue after this huge long movie where you've just been in a psychological moment and now you're into like this horror type aspect of it, right? That just quickly, not quickly drops off, but drops you off, right? Back to like what just happened, okay? So that being said, you know, again, it's a good movie, but it's very heavy, but I expect this out of an A24 film. Now, if you want to compare, say, this to like X, that whole trilogy that they did, that is more horror film, but still has a message behind it, but is more slasher. Whereas this is more of like your traditional A24, where it's having you really think about what you're interacting with and what you're seeing and what it means. And this is definitely one that you will be like Googling, what did the ending mean? What does it mean? And everybody kind of has a different opinion of that, right? So, you know, for me, again, the movie was good. It wasn't like, oh my goodness gracious, amazing, simply because I feel like if it had been sold to me a little bit differently, my expectation would be different. However, I went in there with a certain expectation because of the trailer, and it was one of those films where I was just like, huh, what? Where are we? You know, but again, overall, it was great. I enjoyed it. So if you watched it, let me know what you think in the comment section. Also, if you talk about it, just kind of be aware of not spoiler alerting other things in the comment section. So that is it. I do appreciate it. And until we get back around the old proverbial television and movie screen, I'll see y'all soon.